state. You enter a deeper and deeper failure state.
Yeah. Yeah. Haha. Yeah. Hell yes. Squish Pup Dave, welcome. Welcome to the chat room. Maybe I'm not supposed to do that. Maybe you wanted to just lurk tonight. Let's move me up here. I'm waiting for Discord to go bloop bloop. Let's move my keyboard back just a little bit. And so while we're waiting for some people to filter in, I'm gonna do some electronic cigarette maintenance. Good. Maybe. Yeah. I think we're good. Cool. Maybe while we're waiting too, I wanted to kind of briefly announce, oops, sorry. That was dumb. I wanted to briefly announce that Vandayaha Games is partnering with our very own Rinzai Gaigen in the Game Design Symposium. Is this a good way to show it? Hopefully. But the Game Design Symposium is very cool. Network, spread the word. So as you can see, Vandayaha Games is on here. And I'm supposed to do some things to make that more clear on my Discord server. I just haven't done it yet because I'm going to German language school every day. And I'm so beat by the end of it that I'm like, I don't do anything. I haven't really done anything this week. Like nothing. But yeah, so we are the stealthy stream start. Is it stealthy? I thought it wasn't very stealthy. I said 15 minutes. Maybe it's stealthy. Did it not ping? I swear your Discord bot is the worst in notifying. Dude, it's like at totally random times that it says like, "Hey, streaming." Yeah, maybe I should just do it myself. Is that it? There it is. There's the Discord bot. Tynan Sylvester's GDC ReWatch for real this time. Hello, Bella Kate Cool. How are you? What do I have? Just chatting? We have it set to just chatting. Okay, cool. I think that's appropriate. We're going to be doing like kind of a watching and discussing the game design ideology of who I think is absolutely brilliant. Tynan Sylvester. I think he's a brilliant game designer. I actually would really like to do one of these for a lot of game designers. Like, I think it would be super cool. I don't know who's all... I would like to get it really diverse, you know? Like, I would love to see some game design talks. We could watch, like, the Yoko Taro one, for example. I think that one's really cool. We could watch... other people. But I really like it to like, this could be a fun series, I think, where we kind of pick apart the minds of some of the best game designers in the world today, right? I'm sure there's one on maybe the girl who did Depression Quest. She's really famous. She's gone on to make other things, but I forget her name right now. It's possibly because it's hosted on a free site, and in recent years they switched to having servers sleep for some time, and if it's not directly pinged, so the server oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Sounds great, cool. I'm glad that you guys think that it sounds fun. I think it's just so like this, part of the thing with so we can talk about this a little bit right off the top. So the structure to learning fiction writing, at least in the academical sense, it's stream time. Let's go. In the academic sense, in the academic sense, to study fiction writing, you need to do three things. You need to write fiction. You need to read fiction, but not read it as in read it for fun. Although that's always sucked for me, because the fiction that you're supposed to read to analyze, like the fiction you're supposed to read is the fiction that you want to emulate, right? So like I always wanted to write like Cormac McCarthy, so lo and behold, I read a lot of Cormac McCarthy. The dude is unanalyzable for me because I just instantaneously slip into the nether realm where I don't exist, and it's just me and the story. So that was always a pain in the ass, because like how the hell am I supposed to study it when I'm just so enthralled with the work itself. Which I also think is part of the reason why games are super, super hard to study, at least for me. But I also think that it has something to do with me not really understanding all the work that goes into making a game. But anyway, so there's those two things, right? You're supposed to write a lot of fiction. You're supposed to read a lot of fiction, especially in the categories and from the authors that you're trying to emulate. And then there is the third category, which is to read craft books. Craft books not as important in the fiction writing world, because a lot of the time it's kind of just the writer musing and waxing fantastic. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever watched I really like Neil Gaiman, don't get me wrong, I really like him, but I watched his like masterclass series on writing fiction, and it was like, oh, this dude's actually just not going to tell me how to write fiction. He's like, you have to conjure the light within your memory to consider the beautiful little kernel of truth that you're trying to. I'm like, shut up. And then I just close it. Like, what are you telling? Stop it. What are you doing? But I think that that impersonation is on point. But I've never really been about that kind of thing. Yeah, it sounds like most it's stupid. It's just masterclass lessons are so dumb. That's kind of what I wanted to be. I wanted to be like the anti-masterclass, where I'm like, you want to do it? Here's the mathematical formula. Now go. Unlike narrative, game design principles aren't as well documented. Perhaps that's part of the reason. Totally. This is actually something that I really wanted to talk about for a long time, is that we don't have a universal grammar or like a universal way in which we talk about things with games. Like, we're developing one, but the thing is that games are so broad in the way that they can present their information and narrative that it's really hard. Like, I remember saying not too long ago that I was like, I would really like there to be a standardized control system for PC for like genres. So if you're gonna publish a first person shooter on PC, it should be considered an error if your sprint button isn't shift. Like a comma, you know what I mean? Like if you use a comma to conjoin two independent clauses, that's an error. It's a comma splice. I was like, it would be kind of interesting if there was something like that, right? Like if there was like he made an error here, or they made an error here. You shouldn't be able to use tab for anything other than displaying the round score. It is interesting that you're supposed to study the things you want to emulate, but you can't then read things that are fun for you to read as well. Why do you think that is? Human brain dumb, or something a little more complicated? I think it just depends. I think it's just harder to stay focused. So like if I really want to, I can force myself to study something in order to get better at it, but therefore I'm not enjoying it as much, right? So that's hard to keep focused on studying, because studying isn't as fun, right? And I think that goes for whatever. Like if you want to get better at fighting games, it's actually not really fun to practice anti-airs. That's not a very enjoyable thing to do. It's much more enjoyable to just not get better and then just get your ass beat, right? Like, and then occasionally win through that one cheesy like bullshit thing that you know how to do. But you don't get better. And the same goes for anything. And the same thing goes for writing. Like if you wanted to get better at fantasy writing and you really want to study world building and how they do it, you could sit down and you could just sit there and analyze how the information is presented, why it's presented the way it's presented, blah, 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 blah. And it's going to suck. Like it just will. But I think the studying for scene is actually pretty enjoyable for me. Sorry you said it anti-airs and my grappler brain shut off, but you do make a solid point. You can force it. It's just not as fun. It's just not as fun. But back to Tulanx's point, because there was another thought I had on that. I think part of it is that game design principles, I mean, games are ancient, right? Games are very, very ancient, but we don't seem to document them in the same way that we document, like there's no professor of games, you know what I mean? And I'm not talking like professor of game design who tells you like, he teaches you half how to like code in C# and half about like the historical implications of what went into the making of chess. You know, like because when you take an English class, they're like, well, see, the Romantic period, this is why the Scarlet Letter was written, was because Nathaniel Hawthorne like had a boner on the boat on the way to America. You know, like there are people who like study literature like as a job. You know what I mean? Like they don't do anything else. And I don't know if there's really such thing as like a game literature studier, man, person, woman, they, them. There's not really like there's not an equivalent in the game sphere. Which is why most of the people who do that are on YouTube. Like we're beginning to build a base of literature throughout throughout game development history, but it's all on YouTube. It's from guys like Never Knows Best and the hell, Joseph Anderson. What was her name? Emma. She's super huge. She's like, just her videos are gigantic. I forget her name though. She's also a writer. There's a game journalist, but their objective isn't really analysis. Yeah, not really. I mean, not in the way that written literature analysis works. You know what I mean? Where they're trying to understand like the historical implications and the cultural impact and the, you know, like we don't really have, as far as I'm aware, like there's No Clip. No Clip's another good one. I think it's oh yeah, you just said that. Okay. I think the closest thing we have, No Clip does like, well, he does do it more on design, but he does it more like documentaries, documentary style. And to me, that's not quite analysis. Like, there's also Game Maker's Toolkit. That guy does a really great work, where he kind of traces origins of game elements and design elements and stuff like that. He's quite good. Mr. B-Tongue was really good back in the day, but he stopped making videos, I don't know, 5 years ago, but he might make another one. We know, you know, who knows? Joseph was watching a Joseph Anderson vid before this. Oh yeah, which one? I love Joseph Anderson. I think I have watched his entire catalog like twice. And some of them 3 times. Dark Souls 3, yeah, it's a great video. It's a great video. I love his analysis videos. They are like, it's like a blanket and a hot cup of coffee. Like I can just, I can put the I can just sit back and relax and just enjoy the shit out of Joseph Anderson and analyzing games. He does such a good job. There's also that one guy, I forget his name. I was just talking to him, JMate. JMate, he's really cool. He does stuff for the... Let's see. Heads up, if you want to study the weirdest game story, Shenmue 3 is free on Epic right now. Dude, I can't... there's no way I'll be able to play that game. I watched gameplay of that, and I was like, that's not for me. But there is a really good video by somebody who does analyze that. Oh, yeah, Noah Caldwell-Gervais, by the way. It's miserable. Yeah, it looks horrible. It looks like actually unplayable to me. Noah Caldwell-Gervais is another one. But what was I saying? There was something I was just saying before this. Oh yeah, JMate. So JMate's really cool. He does the anatomy of for The Escapist. He does like the anatomy of series, and he does them on his own channel as well. And he kind of like he said it in his podcast. His new podcast that he just started up that like he got like headhunted by The Escapist, which I thought was really interesting and cool. Because he makes videos for them, right? And it's possible, it might be the case that I end up going on his podcast. I sent him a message and on Twitter, and he responded. He got back to me and said, "Oh, that would actually be really cool." Because one of the things that he talks about in the anatomy of Bloodborne is he talks about the game design that goes into the Bloodborne. Just everything about Bloodborne. And it's a really great video. It's an excellent video. I highly recommend watching it. But the thing that I found really interesting is in that video, he talks about insight. The insight mechanic in Bloodborne. And the insight mechanic is basically the level up mechanic, right? Like as you gain insight, you can spend it to go level up your character, improve your character. The thing that's very interesting, though, is the higher the insight goes on your character, the more the world begins to fall apart for you, right? Like the more horrors you see, the weirder things start to look, the world starts to change, and it becomes a more nightmarish world, right? And that's a brilliant thing to do from a mechanic standpoint. Like as your character gets better at being in the world of Bloodborne, so too does the game present more horror to you, right? Of course. Makes perfect sense. The thing that the anatomy video missed because JMate doesn't have quite the same literary background that I do, and I'll probably talk about this ad nauseum all the time, is that H.P. Lovecraft, who is obviously like a huge influence on Bloodborne, probably the number one influence on Bloodborne, H.P. Lovecraft famously, I don't remember the exact quote, but he famously said something to the effect, if you understood the true nature of reality, you would go insane, right? The only reason why you're a sane human being is because you don't understand the true nature of reality, right? Now, how does one gain understanding? Through insight, right? So, yeah, I was literally typing the HP quote as you said it, yeah. So, in Bloodborne, as your character gains insight, they reveal the true nature of reality, which is more horrifying. Right? That's how brilliant From Software is. They understood the literary concept and the historical relevance of H.P. Lovecraft when they were designing a game mechanic. And they built their entire game mechanic around the idea in H.P. Lovecraft's literature. It's like, what? We live on a placid island of ignorance amid the black seas of infinity. Generally, the easier... It's a brilliant line. Generally, the easier it is for you to see the world around you, the more miserable reality is. It's genius, guys. It's genius. Like, how is that not pushing forward the medium itself? At least in my mind. Maybe it's just because I'm like a literature snob, but like, how does that not push the medium forward? That you're now designing concepts around historically relevant literary authors. It's so cool. It's so fucking cool. But anyway, so that's kind of like the intro. I know exactly why it's not pushing it forward. Wait, what do you mean it's not pushing it forward? It is. Game too hard, me brain smooth. Game too hard, won't play. And that's okay. See, here's the thing. I can't play Bloodborne. I gave up. I was too scared. But luckily, Jake, you'll do it. You can record. Or I can watch it on YouTube, and I can still study it and go, wow, isn't that amazing? That's the thing about those games. I love just watching them exist. It's kind of like Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad novel. Like, I read about half of it, and I was like, okay, I think I got it. Like, it's a good book. I'm not saying it's a bad book, but I'm more happy about it existing than I am actually sitting down to read it. Same thing goes for Squid Game. Like, I watched the first couple episodes. I'm like, I'm glad this exists. This is great. But I'm good. What a sigh. However, Arcane, you're never getting me away from it. I loved Arcane. Everything about Arcane was written like almost to perfection for me. Except for the ending. I didn't like the ending. Installing Dark Souls again. See, Bloodborne. Okay, so anyway, let's get into the meat of today. The meat of today is I want to pick Tynan Sylvester's brain, and I want to do it with y'all. I want to hear what you have to say about Mr. Tynan Sylvester's ideas on game design and game development. So bear in mind, RimWorld is very front-facing as not a game, right? It is a story generator. It says it right when you launch the game, right at the top. Like, it says RimWorld, a story generator, or a fiction generator, or something like that. I think it's a story generator, right? It is a story generator that you just so happen to interact with in order to engage with narrative, right? That's it. He doesn't say it's a game. He doesn't say it's a platformer. Everybody else kind of says that it's a base builder. It's a colony management sim. It's a resource gathering, like everybody else seems to ascribe these things to it. But in Tynan's mind, all he is doing is saying, this is a story generator. What are the things that make it? What are the things that make story? Right? That's it. That's all. That's all we need to talk about in his mind. And so, yeah, I want to see what you guys think about that. So where we left off was he was talking about elastic failure states, right? And the elastic failure state is the idea that in a traditional game, let's say you're playing Halo, because I'm playing the new Halo game right now. You run into the enemy base, you start shooting some guys, and then an elite comes up behind you, hits you in the back, and you die, right? That's a failure state. You have failed. The failure state in Halo, and I would say for the majority of games in general, is you respawn at the last saved point, and you go back into the base and you try again, right? Some other games have started to get around this idea. Like, I think From Software brilliantly navigated around the idea of a save point by building it into how the world itself works, right? Like, the world itself in all of the games, in all of the From Software games, is built around the idea of you dying, and that it diegetically makes sense why you respawn in the places you respawn, right? You are the chosen one not because you're the best, most damaging warrior. You're not the best magic user of all time. You're the chosen one because you don't die. And whenever you die, you tend to reawaken at these bonfires, right? Or when you die as the hunter in Bloodborne, you were sent back to the hunter's dream. And that diegetically works in the world of the game, which is why those games have a much more cohesive understanding of why everything is working in concert. Whereas Halo, not so much. Halo is like, you died, we are hitting rewind, and then we are hitting play at the point in which you are safe and not dead, right? Elastic failure state is like failing forward, kind of, from what I understood. Yeah, totally. It's like failing forward. Yeah, because elastic failure is when you reach a failure state. It's not that you go bam and then crash. It's that you push kind of through it, and then the narrative in the game continue, but now you're continuing in a failure state, right? You can rebuild from this failure state, but it is a failure state. So you lose one of your colonists, but your other 2 colonists become stronger, right? And then you can send your colonists out to save the colonist who was captured by the cannibalistic tribesfolk, and you can actually rescue them. This is stuff that has happened to me in RimWorld, where I've had a colonist captured, and then I go out and then I save them and I bring them back. But now they're a little bit crazy. Now they're addicted to drugs, because the cannibalistic tribes people are all high on drugs all the time in that game. It's just kind of built into the world. It's built into the lore of how RimWorld works, right? So now I got this drug addicted colonist who won't wear clothes anymore. And that's an elastic failure state. And that's brilliant. It's brilliant. Failure is a massive narrative opportunity. Absolutely it is. I wonder if that's why roguelikes are so popular right now. You're literally always failing forward. Yeah, right. Well, especially the ones that are built into the idea of like some form of progression. Like it's not literally you die, you literally completely start the game over. You know what I mean? Like most of the roguelikes being built now are like dying is built into the concept, right? Dying is built into the concept of how the game works, right? Like Dead Cells, or, you know, there's some form of progression taking place. Hades, blah, 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 Slay the Spire, all of them, you know, they all kind of do that. And I think it is part of the reason why they're so popular. I think people just are really engaged by that kind of thing. Although I have to say, I am loving the fuck out of the new Halo game. I really enjoy it. It's like being a kid again. It plays just like Halos from my younger years, except kind of like what I dreamed that they would have been when I was 12. Like, oh, I wish there was a Grand Theft Auto, but like Halo, you know, like it's an open world, but it's Halo. And then that's what this is. All right, so let's watch this.
State. And those failure states tend to be very dramatic.
Is that good volume, by the way? I'm gonna let it play. Everybody just go like yes or no.
And very storyful, because it's in the process of failure and the process of perhaps recovering from that if we can stretch that out, that produces those dramatic situations. Another example of applying the story generator concept is RimWorld's approach to game visuals. So typically, I think when we evaluate game graphics, the most obvious way to do it is to say, how good do they look? How clearly do they communicate gameplay? And these are generally pretty good criteria. But if you're making a story generator, the frame is different. What purpose do the visuals serve? To communicate the story. They don't have to look detailed to do that, or beautiful or realistic. In fact, it might be better if they were less detailed, less beautiful, and less realistic. Because a story is not a sequence of images. It's a sequence of events. Images are just one means of communicating those events. But there are others. When you read a novel, or you listen to a friend tell you a story verbally, your mind fills with the situations and the characters and the emotion. And you feel the story. And those situations and characters and emotions are what the story generator is trying to create. And none of them are visual. So all that stuff on the screen, it's not the end product. The end product is the understanding and emotions and internal experience of creating and enjoying that story. So RimWorld's graphics don't actually attempt to look maximally beautiful or realistic or detailed. I think of RimWorld graphics as a system of symbols, like Asian characters a little bit, or icons on your phone. And they represent abstracted objects. To me, RimWorld graphics are as important as the typeface on a novel. It can be better or worse, but in the end, I don't care, except in terms of how effectively it transmits the story into the player's mind. So how do we do that specifically? In RimWorld, this is what
Okay, I think we can pause there, because Jake made an interesting comparison, right? So Dwarf Fortress, RimWorld is based largely on Dwarf Fortress, right? It very much is. Dwarf Fortress is kind of the OG RimWorld, where like there is no goal. The goal is not to make the best colony. The goal is not to, there's not really much to it. It's like literally ASCII graphics. Although I'm super excited, by the way. Like everybody's seen the Steam page for Dwarf Fortress, right? With the updated graphics and stuff, and the release date is subjective or whatever. I love those guys. I think they're so cool. I've watched a couple of their interviews where they talk about their game, and they're very interesting human beings. So I'm going to play the shit out of that. But RimWorld it functions largely the same as Dwarf Fortress. I'm pretty sure Two Links could back me up on this because you played. I mean, I gave you RimWorld as a thank you for helping me make my first couple of games, right? And you've also played Dwarf Fortress, Two Links, yes. So I'd imagine that you can back me up on that. That they play very similarly. They're very similar in their construction, right? Where it's like you have a group of people. They have their things they're good at, the things they're bad at, their traits, their faults, blah 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 blah, blah. And it goes, the story goes, and there you go, right? Like the game begins and you watch it happen, and you have light control over them, telling them like, we need to be building this, you need to be going here, right? But then it creates all of these amazing things. Like there's just a wonderful YouTube video where the developer of Dwarf Fortress is talking about this thing that they didn't realize that they did, where Two Links might have sent this actually to me actually, where you subtly influence what's happening in DF, but it generally just yeah, right. DF is very similar. I think RimWorld's a little more intuitive, player friendly. I agree. Especially like with the ASCII graphics version. Good lord, like what are you supposed to? DF is a wall of shit that you have to get over. It's really tough. But Dwarf Fortress actually like even goes a little bit deeper with its mechanics, right? Where like there's this amazing story that the developers were talking about where they missed an interaction. They didn't understand how two things would interact, and it was like this really famous. Oh yeah, that vid was something about cats dying from getting too drunk. Yeah, exactly. So like there was some weird interaction where it was like if cats are on countertops and there's beer on countertops, then the cats are automatically considered to have drunk the beer, right? And then there was this weird thing where like the doors were pouring beer on the ground or something, and then it would soak through the cat's feet, and then there was all these dead cats that were getting drunk, and they didn't understand why this was happening, right? Because it's just all it is it's just this computer that is tracking interactions between not real objects and producing outcomes based on these like basically equations bumping into each other, right? Like it's just all Dwarf Fortress is and RimWorld is just equations that bump into each other. And then us as pattern recognition machines go, man, those cats are so drunk. They're so drunk. Isn't that hilarious? The cats are so drunk. When in reality, it's just, it's just equations going, bop, 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 interacting with each other. Now there's 1,000 dead cats in your Dwarf Fortress. I think that's just super interesting, super cool, right? Because you don't really think of a novel like that. You don't really think of a novel as like this living object that kind of makes decisions based on its rules that, and it's live calculating, that doesn't really exist in novels. But I think one of the things that is very interesting to me about this particular section of the Sylvester video is that he very openly says like it actually might be a hindrance for RimWorld to have good graphics. It actually might not be a good thing. And we can talk about this a little bit after this part, but I just kind of wanted to tune your minds to that of like, it is very interesting that he's a developer who openly said like, even if I had more resources, that isn't the right move for this game. The right move for this game is maximum clarity, right? Like these are the things that he says. Not ugly, easily identifiable, and he's going to go over these. Minimal noise, intensity hierarchy, fast implementation, leave room for interpretation. And I think the last one is the critical one. And so we'll talk about that in a second. But for now, muting.
What I tried to hit. Number one, not ugly. If it's painful to look at or it looks awful on video, you're not going to sell that many games because it's just ugly. It's actually unpleasant to look at. So we try to definitely at least reach the threshold of beauty where you can look at it without psychic suffering. Easily identifiable. The visual characteristics have to be very easily to identify for what they represent. And this is in conflict with abstraction a little bit. It makes it easier for new players to play or for people to watch a video or a trailer and understand what's going on, which is important. Minimal noise. Making the graphics really simple reduces the noise in the image. And that reduces the cognitive load to read the image. An image with a lot of detail everywhere might be beautiful, but when you're talking about a game like RimWorld with potentially hundreds and hundreds of objects on the screen, scanning through that with your eyes and finding what matters to you becomes harder and harder the more detail is in there. Intensity hierarchy. This is one way of helping people determine visually what is important and what is not. So it's essentially a hierarchy of what you call visual intensity, to draw the eye more strongly towards things that are story relevant and let the eye slide over things that matter less. As a simple example, characters and buildings in the game have solid black outlines, but plants have dark green outlines or no outlines at all. And this means that plants tend to blend into the background slightly. You can still see them, it's not difficult, but the characters really pop out. So if there's a big field of trees and one character on it, the character looks like he's in the foreground, and the plants are all sort of smeared together. And it draws your eye there. And the same is true of items. Gold, food, all have black outlines. Plants, no. Second to last, fast implementation. For RimWorld, I really just made graphics really, really quickly. Skipping over the need to worry about animation and complex graphics made it possible to inject more story content into the game, more mechanics. A lot of this stuff would be almost impossible to do if we tried to do it anywhere near the standard that a lot of games go for with their graphics. Because if the only goal is to enrich the story, you cut whatever details you need to make the story as rich as possible. It's all about focusing on that one target of being a story generator that works well. And finally is leave room for interpretation. I'm going to go into this later, but the basic notion is that you don't show everything, and that lets the player imagine things better. But I have a later discussion on that, which is right here. Usually one would assume that in order to play or in order to enjoy some aspect of a game, the developer has to implement that aspect of the game. But it's not necessarily true. So if you consider this table, in the top left and the bottom right are what you would expect. You put something in the game and people enjoy it, or people read it. You don't put something in the game and nobody perceives it because it's not there. The top right is a classic design failure, wherein a designer might put some complex, beautiful number system in, but the player just reads it as noise because they don't know what's going on, or they don't see it. But the bottom left is what I'm really interested in. This is what I mean when I'm talking about impossible game design. Something that's not present in the game, but the players are perceiving it anyways. And think of how powerful this is, because you don't even have to do the work, but the players are enjoying things that you never had to actually implement. And it works because the human mind is really an overactive system for matching patterns. This is why ancient people, they would look at the constellations in the sky, and they would see beasts or chariots or people. Or they saw messages from the gods in chicken guts and tea leaves. And people pattern match in a very specific way. It's not random. People interpret everything that's possible as tribal interpersonal politics. So this is why religious traditions or mythologies would interpret unknowable phenomena in the old days, like weather or earthquakes, with the intentions of unseen deities. It's the weather has an intention. It's not just an object. Or political discussion tends to revolve around pretending countries are people, or corporations are people. It's like France did this, or Germany did that. Germany is a lot of different people, and it doesn't have a single intention. But we anthropomorphize it that way. And I think it's because the part of our mind that models social interactions is super overdeveloped, because it's important to us. But it's so overdeveloped that we thoughtlessly apply it to everything, effortlessly, without even realizing we're doing it. And we impart emotions and intentions on things like rocks and rivers and rain and stuffed animals. And this happens, of course, even though these things don't have feelings. So we can use this. Since the goal of RimWorld is to create a story of emotions and intentions, and people are massively overinterpreting these things, we can let the player's pattern matching mind automatically and unconsciously ascribe emotion and intention in places where it doesn't actually exist.
Okay, so he said something that's really important there. The important sentence, at least in my mind, is we can let the audience, or the players, ascribe emotion and intention where there might not otherwise be any. Right? This is what every single professional writer tells a journeyman writer to do. Right? I think I told this to Squishy Puff Dave the other day, but one of the in my undergraduate schooling, when I was studying creative writing for my bachelor's degree, we had a writer come, like a professional writer, come to visit, and because we had a yearly conference at this university for fiction writing, actually for creative writing in general. It wasn't just fiction; it was also poetry. I think playwrights came too, but I didn't go to those. I just went to the fiction ones, and somebody asked, and this has been asked in many different writing interviews. I've seen this said ad nauseum throughout my entire life studying for creative fiction writing, is somebody will raise their hand and they'll say, well, what did you mean by that? Right? What did you mean by X? What was your goal? What was your intention with giving your character a flaming sword or whatever, just as an example, a flaming sword. And almost always the professional writer says, there was no meaning. I just gave them a flaming sword. Right? Guy needed a sword. I made it flaming. And I wanted them to have a sword, guys. And that concept is basically exactly what Tynan Sylvester is talking about in his game. It's like almost the same. Because how it works is the audience is looking at the flaming sword and they're looking at the character and they go, he has a flaming sword because he's brave. Right? What else does a flaming sword mean in the context, right? Like it has to mean some kind of bravery. It has to mean lionhood. It has to mean something beyond the guy has a flaming sword. It has to. That's how our minds work. And it's the same thing with all of the fiction, all of it, everything in the fiction. This is why I say all the time that objective correlatives are so incredibly powerful, because all you have to do is put an objective correlative into a scene, and then your audience will do the work for you. They will just do it, and they'll do it better than you will. That's the very interesting thing, because our minds are better at pattern recognition. This is also why I say all the time that we're better at intuiting stories than we are at writing them, right? Intuiting the narrative it comes from our innate pattern recognition abilities, right? And our innate ability to see things that aren't there. Ascribe meaning to things that don't have it, right? If your character walks over a river after a fight with their spouse, they have effectively changed their entire disposition on reality, right? The river represents, and how do you describe the river? The river is rushing. Okay, it's a hard choice for them to make because the river is rushing, right? You didn't need to write, it was such a hard choice, leaving their spouse. All you had to do is describe the river as rushing and them walking over it. And that does all of the work, right? Because in our minds, even if we don't know it, even if the audience doesn't recognize what's happening, if they see a character walking over a rushing river, walking over a bridge that goes over a rushing river, we just intuit it. We know it's happening, right? This is something like what Red Letter Media says in their videos, in the I forgot the name. Mr. Plinkett videos, right? He always says, like, you didn't notice it, but your brain did, right? And that is literally what he's saying, is like, there are things that you don't notice when you're watching a film, but your brain does. You don't notice that him walking over a river is the objective correlative to saying that he's getting over his breakup with his spouse or whatever, but your brain did. Your brain noticed, right? And doing the work is fun. says Corvidash. Doing the work is fun. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that 90% of the enjoyment, of the joy that comes from playing RimWorld is ascribing narrative to things that, I mean, these little people on the screen don't exist. These little people named like Sparkles McGee, you know, like she's not real. But in my mind, she's real. And I still remember her name. Her name is Sparkles. She was a character in one of my RimWorld playthroughs. And me having to do the narrative heavy lifting is amazing, right? Hashvar Void Pirate. He just wants a pet cat. Is that from like Dwarf Forges? But yeah, so he's going to go on to talk about this, but I thought that it would be good to kind of pause and make note of what is so powerful about this. And because it serves to show that you might not always, the development time that you're putting into making sure that people really understand what the hell you're talking about might not actually be useful, right? Because it is most often better for the audience to just experience it themselves, right? All you really need to do when you're creating fiction is put characters in physical situations that human beings can understand, right? You can push the limits of it, but you need to put them in situations that a human being can at least identify with. Which is often why you don't see huge sweeping like camera shots in novels. They just don't really work in novels, where it's like there's a huge town and there are people walking around in it and there's traffic. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't really work in a novel, and the stakes usually in novels are very grounded. It's very hardly ever is it this person needs to do this to save humanity. They need to do this to save their dog, because their dog is a representation of humanity, right? It is the grounded representation of humanity. Mary Jane is a grounded representation of humanity, of love itself, right? You can't have a character go try to save love itself, because that becomes tacky and shitty, like super fast. But you can have a character try to save a loved one, because then they are saving love itself. A noble goal to pet cats. When I tried RimWorld, that was one of my colonists. Oh. All right. Let's go.
And that's useful because stories are made of emotions and intentions. So here are some ways to do it, or some things that feed into this phenomena, which I call apophenia. One is abstracted feedback. This is what I mentioned before. The player can only invent interpretations if you don't force an interpretation upon them. This is why the graphics are kept so simple in RimWorld. So for example, here's the situation. The doctor is treating his wife's bullet wound, but it doesn't show the characters' faces or their body language. This is deliberate. It means that the player is free to imagine these faces and this body language based on the situation. If we put a visual image of that body language in, the player would not be able to imagine it. So, if the doctor and the wife like each other, the player might imagine a heartfelt moment of tension as he tries to save her. And if they dislike each other, the player might imagine that they have this like get it over with attitude, or I'll let you touch me barely. And if one character likes the other but not the reverse, there's all sorts of other permutations that you could come up with. The second thing is long-term relevance. You want to keep things relevant for a long time to maximize the connections between circumstances and events. Interesting story events and interpretation spring from the overlapping of different circumstances. So if you can retain over time the reasons why a character might want to do something, why might they want to have that intention, or why they might feel a certain way, you can give people food to generate their own interpretations. So for example, this is why in RimWorld I specifically designed the random incidents to take a long time to play out, wherever possible. So diseases, they last a long time. So does the toxic fallout. It floats down for months, half a year maybe. Volcanic winter. Prowling manhunter packs of wild boars. They wait outside the doors for a week, hoping you'll come out. sieges, and so on and so forth. Colonists remember events like family deaths or marriages or divorces. They know their relationship. They know what this person did to them. Failed surgeries. They remember these things for a long time. So there's many ways for these situations to overlap and connect together and knit into a story of intentions. So for example, if the doctor previously failed a surgery on his wife, she will have a memory record of that, which the game will express. It says, botched my surgery. It makes her express dislike for him in the game systems. But that's pretty thin in terms of how we do it numerically with the game. But in terms of how this player can interpret it, it can be quite rich in terms of how she might feel about this situation.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing too, right? Where he notes that it's quite easy to say if character X fails Y thing, then character A gets a -2 emotional modifier to character X. Right? Like, that's not a particularly difficult thing, from what I understand, to code. However, it is an incredibly complex emotion. An incredibly complex emotion that can permutate and can change in the player's mind as they play the game, right? It can evolve and change. Because now what happens in a year when those two characters get married, right? Now you have this historical record of, remember when these two hated each other because he botched her surgery. Right? Or later on, they're invaded by, pirates or whatever, and she gets, she's being chased, right, or something, and he shoots one. You can imagine how the scene plays out in your mind, right? You can imagine, even in a film, right? Like, you could picture it almost like it's a film, where, like, he botched her surgery, she now runs slower, because, I don't know, maybe he botched it on her leg, and so now she runs slower, and she's being chased, and then he shoots the person who's chasing her and he dies, right? And you can almost see the expression on his face when he shoots the evil pirate guy, right? It's almost like a zoom in where he's like, I saved you, like a more noble approach, right? Maybe if he likes her, and then he's like, his sullen, and there's all of these things, and all of that stuff gets tracked by the game. All of that stuff gets tracked in their emotional log. And it's amazing for that reason, especially because of what he said earlier about, like, the Apophenia, right? The abstracted feedback, where, I mean, this is obviously just not very good looking, right? I mean, I don't think I can zoom in any further, but the characters don't look very good from, like, a beauty standpoint, from, like, a fidelity standpoint, right? But we get enough where, like, it looks like she has bangs and her hair is kind of, like, poofy, right? His hair is kind of poofy and he looks big, right? He looks like maybe a little overweight. And he's looking over her bed, and like Tynan said, if he likes her but she doesn't like him, then that produces an entirely different emotional response, even though the game is completely ignorant to this. It has no idea that it's doing this. The game has no concept of it producing these results for you, right? The game is perfectly ignorant, as it were. This is actually something that's kind of cool about AI Dungeon. I don't know if anybody's fiddled around with that, but in AI Dungeon, it's really fun to write with the AI because the AI has no inhibitions. Like, it just has nothing, You can have two characters walking down a street together, and then suddenly there's a vampire bat that has landed on the window, and you're like, well, that wouldn't. I mean, I wasn't going to write the scene like that. And then you're like, but it's not that bad, actually. Like, turns out when you don't have any inhibitions when you're writing, that it's actually, it can produce some pretty interesting results. And that's what RimWorld is, right? It just has no inhibition. The imagination is space to run around and interpret story when given minimalist but consistent rules. Yeah, totally. And events that happen due to those rules. Absolutely, right? I think that's part of the reason why, I mean, this is what they say with lore building, right? Or world building, where it's like your magic system has to be consistent, right? It has to be consistent. You can't break your own magic system, otherwise then the entire world falls apart. And I think that what they're really saying is that there needs to be a cause and effect to the various things that take place in a narrative. There has to be a cause and effect, and the cause and effect has to be logical, and it has to be born from previous cause and effects. If you just change one randomly, then it's like, ugh. There's a reason why some pixel art low-res horror games seem scarier. Totally. Honestly, I think it's kind of a mistake a lot of the time to go high fidelity. Like a lot of the time, it's a mistake. Because high fidelity always ends up approaching this uncanny valley thing that like, ugh, and the fidelity kind of, it's almost like revealing the monster. You know what I mean? Like in a horror movie or like a horror novel, it's like the monster looks exactly like this. Then you're like, okay, well then it's not actually as scary as I thought it was. Exactly, right? It's not as scary as you thought it was. In your imagination, you conjure the fear much more than any person, any special effects artist can. I think this is part of the reason why Phasmophobia was so strong in the beginning, because Phasmophobia was like, it did everything it could to not show you any sort of monster. I mean, I got feelings playing Phasmophobia that I got when I used to go with my friends into like old houses when I was a kid at night. You know, like we would sneak out of the house or whatever and go into like an old house. And I remember like like pushing my shoulder up against my friend, like, okay, if I die, then he's dying too, because my shoulder is touching his back. Because the imagination of what was in this house was so much scarier than what was actually in my house. And it same went for Phasmophobia. That's where that point kind of came from. Analog horror does this for me. My brain goes haywire watching/playing that stuff. It's a fake VHS training video that gives just enough to make me lose my shit. And Squishy Puff Days agrees with that. Analog horror does this for me. Analog horror is a VHS tape? Dylan, I've known you for a long time, says Jake. I'm waiting for the do not watch analog horror. Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe. But you will die. So when we say analog horror, are we talking like Blair Witch type thing? Like analog as in, there's like a diegetic cameraman in the narrative, or is it like or is this like the title of something? Local 58 is top tier. Is that I'm assuming this is analog horror. Dude, Local 58 fucks me up. I've never even heard of this until today. Maybe we should watch it. Is it copyright? Maybe we should analyze its scenes. That would be fun. But see, Jake, we have to watch it for studying. That'd be cool. I think that'd be fun. You just have to stay focused, right? Make it boring so that we can study it. If you're going to watch it, start with the Mandela catalog. If you can watch that, you're good. Okay, cool. And that sounds fun. What was I talking about? Hey, Popsy, do you want to come up? One sec. Hop up. Come on. Let's watch Tynan Sylvester. Say hello to the stream below. Okay. What was I going to say? Oh, so, fuck it. We'll just keep going on with this. And then I think we're probably going to move into the, we should move into Dave's ARG pretty soon. The link is waiting for you in Discord. Okay, cool. I'll figure out if it's copyrighted, because I think that'd be really fun to do on stream. But if not, then, we can do it on Discord or something. As like, I almost want to like make a poll to see what's a good time for everyone to do Discord streams so that we can watch copyrighted things. Not for like, because not to like sit down and watch, Transformers or whatever, because then people get to watch it illegally for free. More like because I want to teach things about creative writing and narrative fiction. And the best way to do it is to show examples, but all the examples will get hit by copyright algorithms. No, it's all made on YouTube. The game purposely posts it there so other people can react to it. The guy purposely. Okay, cool. All right, so these are totally copyright free because I can fair use. Fair use. We're not going to do that today, because I do want to play Dave's ARG, but I do like this idea. This sounds fun. And then let me scroll back up to see if there's anything else I wanted to cover. Oh yeah, so just the last point on like the pixel art thing, what Tuling said and what Corvid Ash was kind of talking about is that, so like picture your favorite character from a novel. I'm sure everybody has like a character in their mind of a book they read, whatever, right? For me, it's the prime example for me is Zero from Holes. This is the example I always give. So in Holes, I always pictured the Zero character to be bald. I don't know why. I just pictured him to like basically have alopecia. And then when the movie came out, they produced a high fidelity version of what my imagination told me Holes was, right? And in the film, they chose the actor who has like kind of like the curly Afro-y style hair, right? And I was like just devastated because it was as though the character in the novel died. Like he wasn't the canon character anymore because I watched, and everybody has this story. Everybody I've ever met is like, that is not how X character looked in my mind, right? That is not how Robb Stark looked in my mind. That is not how Catelyn Stark, whatever. Aragorn, Frodo, it just beloved characters. And part of it is that the novel is a very low fidelity device. It's like almost zero fidelity. A writer can describe things very, very, very eloquently and can describe them very detailed, but it's not going to produce the same. It's not going to produce the same amount of detail as like a single picture. There's always going to be these kind of interpretations of like, well, he just like a writer describes like the vast cityscape and the buildings are white and tall and the windows glisten in the whatever sunlight and it's there's blue orange clouds and purple smog filling the streets, and like even just in that, it's not even close to a picture of New York City, not even close. And your picture, and everybody who's watching that stream and who is listening to what I just said about that cityscape conjured a different image in their mind. Completely. Oh yeah, like watching Inkheart was so dull and infuriating after having read the books. Movie adaptations never failed to disappoint my image of how I thought novel characters would look. Right, because your imagination is much stronger than anything else. And it's also much more tied to you. Right? Your interpretation is a bond that you build with a character or that you build with a place in a novel. This is why novels are so strong. Because they make you do work. They make you do imagination. They make you do stuff, right? The same is true for games. Games make you... Sorry, that was a tangent. No, it's okay. I'm going on tangents all over the place. The same can be said with games and why games I think are so effective, because by their nature they make you do things. The reason why you develop a bond with a character is because you are playing as that character. Right? They make you do stuff. And so even if you don't like the story, you still like Nathan Drake. Which is super weird. Right? Because Nathan Drake is an ass, but you like him. And the story is shit, but you like Nathan. Pardon my D&D-ness, but the wildest part of this whole "that character didn't look like I thought" phenomenon for me happens when you are literally sitting across the table from the person playing that character. I can English that statement. It made sense. Yeah, right. So like if a person is pretending to be like a big or like a big skinny elf, and they're kind of like just like a me, And you're like, Dylan doesn't look like an elf. Or are you referring to something else? But yeah, so that's all to say that Tynan understands this in RimWorld, right? These characters do not convey a ton of information, but they don't do it very high fidelity, right? Like this is obviously a very obese man, and he has kind of an afro. My version of this character is different from your version of this character, and that's amazing. That's awesome. That's a good thing, right? That means that this game is approaching a novel.
If the wife needs surgery because of a wound from an animal who's still prowling outside, and food is short, and the two were divorced recently, but they had a cathartic fight that they feel better about, you could just pile in the context and imagine what all these different permutations. Next, I want to talk about game developers. So game developers, as a group, I think we tend towards, obviously, a fascination with mechanics and logic and systems and numbers. And especially this is in computer game development, because this is how computers work. So game developers will often chase their own emotional signals and tend to work towards mechanical, numerical interactions that are interesting, which can work really well. Don't get me wrong. But if we're making a story generator, this is a trap, because stories are not made of numbers. They're really made of emotions. A story generator game has
made of emotions. I'm just going to say it again. Scenes. Scenes are emotional vehicles. That's all they focus. That's their only function. I'm just saying, +1 for Dylan. Take that, atheists, etc., etc.
To relentlessly focus on the emotional journeys of the characters depicted. And this is really different from a game, where the numbers and the mechanics provide the puzzle that the player can test themselves against. So as before, we have a conflict between the game as a skill test and the game as a story generator. In a skill test game, the player spends their time engaging with a logical system that they can master. In a story generating game, the player spends their time engaging with the imaginary emotions of the characters. And so many times, I've gotten suggestions from players for mechanics that would be interesting to add. Interesting. More intricate economic production chains. Like right now, you can just dig steel out of the ground and build something with it, which is ridiculous. Because in real life, you have to dig ore out and then get some coal and smelt them together and refine them. And people want that modeled, some of them. Weapon customization with grips and stat changes and scopes. Propagating fluid dynamics or gas. Or deeper simulation of plant seeding or animal breeding or these sorts of things. These don't go into the game automatically because even though they're interesting, none of them are fulcrums for characters' emotional journeys, or at least not as strong as they could be. You're not going to get an emotional character moment from somebody smelting ore or seeding plants. And that's the sort of decision razor that I try to apply to cut things out of the design. Is it relevant to the character's emotional journey? If it's not, it doesn't go in the game. So I focus always on things that characters will feel about. Things like changes in relationship status between people, arrival and departure of family, health problems created and solved, food being good or bad or scarce or plentiful. I mean, these speak to deep human needs, evolutionary time needs, social competition and wealth and status, quirks and traits of individuals. I mean, getting to know people is a very feeling intense process. And this can be hard to do because I have the same impulses as everyone else who loves to write computer code, which is I'm really interested in numbers. So it's easy to fall into the trap of self-indulging that and saying, oh, I'm going to code this really interesting thing that's going to make this system that's going to have all these crazy properties. But I try to suppress that because it could drive the game away from what it's really supposed to do, which is story generation. So I always ask over and over, does this enrich the emotional journeys of the characters? So that's RimWorld as a story generator. Next, I want to move on to some of the specific methodology that I used during development. So
okay, so I think we can probably leave off for there, so we can get to Dave's ARG and talk about that. But the one thing that I did want to say about that toward the end was that I don't know what my dog's doing. That he says that he takes a razor to everything which does not enrich the character or the character's emotional journeys in the game, right? And I think that's a really interesting thing because the examples he gives are like it would be cool from a game mechanic standpoint if the characters actually had to do a little bit more in order to create steel, or to be able to create they have to make steel first, so then they can then make steel chairs, right? Whereas in the game it's just like they mine the wall and then they can make the chair out of the stuff they got out of the wall, right? His point about emotional journey, yeah, you said it. Okay. But the thing that is interesting is from my viewpoint, from my standpoint, I think that it's a brilliant move because there's two reasons for this. Number one is that if you don't know what the hell you're writing about, this is common advice. If you don't know what the hell you're writing about, just write about it generically, right? So like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is famous for this, right? Where she obviously has no idea how you would even begin to create a life from a pile of body parts that are sewn together, right? She has no concept. No idea. So she just says, in the laboratory, there are many baubles and big metal things, and they're boiling and blah, 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 and steam comes out and blah, blah, blah. Like it's not, because she has no idea what the hell she's talking about. But does it matter? No, it doesn't matter. It plays no impact on the story whatsoever. Because, and this is the thing that I've said multiple times, which is that so long as the world of your story is confident in its existence, as long as the scientist who is creating Frankenstein is confident in the devices around him will work, then everybody's like, yeah, right, the baubles and the steam maker, those obviously have something to do with making monsters. Holy shit, 1 second, I gotta figure out what this dog's doing. Luke, what are you doing? Shit. He was licking his bowl against a door. So yeah, that's the first thing that I wanted to say about that, is that that this is kind of the reason why he cuts out some of those let's say higher versions of or more detailed versions of how these things would work, is because in a story context, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how that stuff works, right? And the second thing that I wanted to say about this is that there's very common advice. Pinckney used to say this all the time in the MFA, which is like, people would say, well, how do you end a scene, right? How do you leave off to go to the next scene? And Pinckney would always say, literally 100% of the time, at the moment you run out of interesting things to say, hit enter twice. The literal second. Like, if you get to the end of the sentence, hit enter twice, the scene is over. As soon as the interesting stuff is over, right? Because why would you want uninteresting things in your story? It doesn't really matter how a guy, unless you're going to just, unless there's a specific reason for how the guy smelts the metal, because he is a smelter, and the way he smelts it indicates something about his character, it doesn't matter, and it shouldn't be in the story. It just doesn't. So don't just have somebody smelting for the sake of smelting, is essentially what he's saying, right? Don't just have that just because it's in it, because that's not what the point of this is. The point of this is to tell a story. Smelting doesn't tell stories. If he could figure out a way to make it tell stories, like if he could somehow figure out how to build in a more complex objective correlative system in the game, then that would be, we're talking about one of the most brilliant things ever made. Because then you can add a whole other layer of complexity where, like, your RimWorld character could start to develop objective correlatives. And in some ways they kind of do, like bastardized versions of them. Like they'll engrave their rifles and stuff with like poems, which is amazing. I mean, sounds like I just blew that off, but it's not quite objective correlative in like the classical sense. Anyway, let's play a little bit of this ARG, huh? What do you say, guys? So Dave sent me this specifically for scene structure. And this is an email address. So to give a quick shout out to Squishy Buff Dave. He works for an Australian outfit. An Australian outfit called Ukiyo, right? And I'm assuming I'm pronouncing that correctly. Ukiyo. And they produce, primarily kind of like narrative-driven escape rooms. But due to the pandemic, they've made some new things, right? They've made some ARGs. This is the sequel to the first Ukiyo. Okay. This is the sequel to their first ARG, which is kind of almost like a love letter to David Lynch. Holy shit. I wanted to say Daniel Finch for some reason. David Lynch's, good Lord. Why am I forgetting the name of this now? David Lynch's show title. What the hell's happening to me? Twin Peaks. Good Lord. Thank you. This is the Ukiyo love letter to Twin Peaks. And so then this is the sequel, which is hilariously called Fire Stalk with Me, which is obviously like Fire Walk with Me. Okay, so password is Dorothy. Username is Jeffrey Jensen at stockmail.com, Dorothy. So I think it's right at the beginning. This is an objective correlative, right? His password is a woman, the name of a woman. I think that's important. If it had been Dorothy 666, then it would have been a very different meaning, right? I want to hit inspect page immediately. Is that something that people do? Twine. All right. Log in. Okay, so we've logged into an email. Oh, context. You're hacking Jeffrey, a person of interest. A person of interest in a missing person's case, right? In a missing woman's case or a murder case? I can't remember exactly the detail. Yep. Okay. All right. And so we're reading his emails, Jeffrey's emails. We, the player. Right, because you are the player in an ARG, right? You are the protagonist. Literally. Dylan is the protagonist. Okay. So, inbox. Oh, that's where we are. So, let's just read a couple of these to begin with. B&W, 10/31/1993. Gladwell deliveries at stockmail.com. It's over. You might as well dial the labyrinth and disappear, B&W. Don't know what that means. Rainfall MP3.
It's more than that.
Go on.
I can feel it coming down. All of it. Like a devastating rain. Set to erase it all. Well, not quite erase it. Shift. One step sideways into something else.
Where are you during this rainfall?
Everywhere. I'm everything. Looking at it all, reading it all, listening. Apart, but within. The rain will take me with it, but I will still have eyes and ears. I can still fix it, solve it.
Interesting. Yes, the voice acting is very good. Corpordash, you were correct in that. Oh, I adore this already, says Sasquatch. Yeah, Ukiyo, they did a really good job with this. They did a really good job with the first one too. I didn't obviously play the first one because it was years and years ago. But I went back and listened to some of the stuff thanks to Dave who sent me links to all that stuff. But the production value is awesome. And in the first one, there were like live shows being cast and like it was nuts. It sounded like it was just unbelievably complex. And this one seems also incredibly complex. Dave seemed like he was very busy making things. This rainfall, the word is enough to put me right inside Rupert's troubled mind. Remember now it was a win. The first time I wore those, he was so beautiful. Rupert, again this rainfall, always the rainfall, and this rainfall, the last rainfall. Remember to ask merrily about something I wish I could read. Never mind. And then a torn off corner. Cool. Inbox. I can't believe this is made in twine. This is awesome. To be made in twine. It's very convincing. I know you were mad last time, and I've forgiven you for the things you said. Now we've both calmed down. You'll no doubt be pleased to hear that I finally found a full copy of the video you wanted. As per my last email, can you please send through that payment? The check you sent me bounced. Wait, this is twine? Yeah, it's twine. Dave? Ha! I wrote this.
In the beginning, before any of us were born, before cities or civilization, there was the witch. The witch lives beyond time, outside of time, and even through time. She was born unlike us, not by a mother, but by incantation. Somewhere beyond civilization's reach, in an unhallowed weald, the first enchanter unstitched the fabric of reality so as to create life. Among the whirls of wind-bent trees and pulsing stars, two daughters of incantation came to be, cradled in brambles and thorns. These two children were conjoined by the hand, their outstretched arms fused together at the wrist. Appalled by this apparent mistake, the enchanter severed the children's hands, separating them for eternity. This capricious act left one daughter with 6 fingers, and the other daughter with 4, and thus the world became subject to the throes of these two immensely powerful beings. The two witches grew at a rapid pace, learning the ways of alchemy, divination, and necromancy. The 4-fingered witch grew jealous of her 6-fingered sister for possessing what was rightfully hers. In the cover of night, she spoke in dreams to a local witch hunter, leading him to track down and slay the 6-fingered witch. He spread her ashes across the 4 corners of the earth, as is custom, hoping to prevent her return. Little did he know that the 6-fingered witch had cheated death, and was reborn the following spring with the aid of her coven. She appeared to the witch hunter in the form of a beautiful woman, and seduced him with bread and wine. When he spoke of his dreams, and of the 4-fingered woman, the 6-fingered witch knew she had been betrayed. Since then, a war has raged beyond the veil of civilization. The eternal damage wreaked by these witches led to the formation of
blank. I didn't write all of that, right? I don't remember writing some of that, which is fine. I think everything that was added made it a lot better. But holy shit, how about that art? That art is amazing. You did the latter half. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's good. It's good writing. I'm amazed that you were able to like match my cadence and because like your rhythm does not break from my rhythm at all. It doesn't sound like somebody else wrote it. You know what I mean? To me it does, but that's just because I remember that I didn't write some things. But you did a really good job of like matching my beginning. Well, this is a great kind of introduction, right, to this narrative where clearly this, I mean, I'm assuming that this is supposed to come much later for the players, right? Like we're kind of getting almost like a sneak peek of too much information right now. But I think that it's really cool that it kind of sets like this groundwork of like, why does this guy have so many fingers and so many pies? This guy's email, you know? What was he doing? Why was he, for sure that video is a huge revelation for the mystery. Yeah, right. Like that's supposed to be a snippet that you find quite a bit later as you're searching through things. Is there anything else here that you wanted me to show off, Dave, or should I move to the archive? Because I just want to say, like, it's so cool. It's such an interesting premise, right? This weird, like, Folktown lore of, like, the six-fingered witch and the four-fingered witch, but it's like there's a cult around them, and there's, like, this weird Janus Ministries. Old friend? Okay. McMorrow@stockmail.com. So no text here.
Rupert, this old friend of yours, do they have a name?
The archived one? Okay.
I never needed their name.
But you've known them for a long time.
We're colleagues.
Okay.
They help me when I call. I help them when they call.
Do they call often?
I
You've been speaking a lot recently, working on this case.
I reach out, they answer. That's just how it works.
And what do they say to you?
Doctor, you're not... It's a professional...
It's okay, I understand. You don't need to externalize your own worth. You are all you need.
You can't.
You are all you need. You are all you need.
I can't do this by myself.
Rupert, you already are.
I love the emotional weight of these. Like the emotional kind of delivery of these, where it really does imply that there's some serious stakes to this narrative, right? The emotional context of the characters being very upset about these things. Yeah, the actors did amazing. Like the way that they even interrupted each other was really cool, because I imagine that they were not recording in the same room either, given, the circumstances. So that they were able to, I mean, there was really, really excellent editing to make it sound like they were live interrupting each other, which is not easy. Or they were somehow doing that over fucking Zoom, which is also incredibly impressive. So, yeah, I would say they did a great job. Also, are all the actors Australian? Because I haven't heard like even a hint of an Australian accent. But I really like that refrain that the interviewer, I don't know, I'm not sure who that was, but the guy who kept saying, "You are all you need, you are all you need." That's a really good refrain, because it gives somebody, yeah, all Australian except for the Irishman. It's crazy. You guys did a really good job with the American accents. I think it's a really really good way to prime people's minds for something that they should look out for, right? These audio logs having refrains, because that's what refrains are supposed to be. That's the function of a refrain, is to kind of pull your mind in a direction, to make you think about something often, right? They're used in poetry very often to recontextualize meanings of something, to recontextualize the meaning of the poem at large to the audience, and to also just drive home a point, right? So like in a Huzzle style poem, Huzzle being spelled Ghuzal, Huzzle, it's an Arabic style. Each line has a refrain, or each second line has a refrain. It's the same refrain, and you need to recontextualize the refrain each time you use it, right? And this style of poetry is ancient and also really well respected and well beloved because of that. To explain that last clip, it's suggesting that you, the player, are a figment of Rupert's imagination. And which one is Rupert? Rupert is the man who was crying, or is Rupert the interviewer? I literally just read that. I was about to read Dave's message again. So Rupert, the man who was crying, is Rupert. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. There's a name. He avoids it. Rupert is the main detective character, yes. Oh, and so you might be a figment of his imagination who contacts you in the first place. Gotcha. Interesting. That's really interesting to find. That's a really cool way to kind of bring a character into a story, but also diegetically explain why you're not in the story, right? Like, it's a good way to solidify the idea that, like, Dylan, who's literally never investigated anything in his life, could somehow be wrapped up in this narrative, right? Because it actually is the case that I'm not, and he contacted the wrong person, and also he thinks that I'm not real, you know? That was 100% my intention. I'm sure it was. Yeah, it's a great way to do it. It's a great way to think about a player as a character, right? Which is what I think a lot of games need to do, and what From Software does. The From Software games think of players as the character, right? The trials that your collection of digital pixels goes through, the trials that your polygons go through in From Software are minuscule compared to the emotional trials that you go through trying to beat Bloodborne. And they understand this, which is how they're trying to bring you into the game, right? And they bring you into the game by basically just pissing you off constantly. It's hard to work a real person into a fictional, sometimes outlandish narrative. It's really hard. It's super hard. It is astoundingly difficult to suspend disbelief when the protagonist is actually you. But it's powerful, and ARGs are the best at it. Makes sense, right? I mean, it's a game that is not played within the confines of like a .exe file, right? Let's see. Rupert, Saturday, Munda. There's a name, he avoids it, dances around it, as though merely uttering the name would summon a swarm of memories too overwhelming to bear, each with a sting more deadly than the last. Call Jensen, right? And then this is upside down. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to figure out how to flip it. Not now, because we have some more things to look at. Unless there's something that I desperately need to look at there. But I'm unfortunately kind of running out of time here. Congrats, user. You've received a gift from Stawk Mail. Dear user, you have won a free pumpkin and tote bag. Simply redeem this voucher at Stawk Mall to help desk. Thanks. Archived. Explore however you like. Okay. So is this the VHS tape? Here's the video I asked for, though. Why you'd want such a cheap-looking cartoon is beyond me. I'm much more of a Popeye fan myself. And before you get uppity at me, I didn't violate the terms of our agreement. I didn't watch the video. I only looked at the first couple seconds to verify its contents. The tape in question was rather difficult to acquire. Is this the same tape? I might have skipped something that I shouldn't have. Yes, this is the same tape.
Stitch
Yes.
the fabric of reality.
Yeah, okay. My son's beloved pizza. I'm assuming that this was like an earlier version that you send out, right? And that they find the full version later. Let's see. Collateral. Correct. Yeah, I figured. Is collateral also the same?
The town's awful quiet these days.
Quiet.
It's not.
Makes you uncomfortable.
I'm not here for analysis, Finn.
Force of habit.
That said, I could still use some of your professional wisdom.
Jeffrey, I've told you before. My work is my life. I can't betray the confidence of my patients.
Oh.
I won't.
That's a very interesting thing to say, Doctor. The great, enigmatic, mystical Dr. McMorrow. Always listening.
That voice actor is fun. Okay, so I have a question. You mentioned that you specifically wanted to detail this about scene, right? And so I guess what I'm curious about, Dave, is like, what was the entering emotion that you wanted the player to have when they came to this particular rendition of the email, right? Or like with all of the emails in it, because I'm assuming at some point they come to this email and they're thinking, wow, look at all these emails, right? And I'm talking about all of them. So not toward the beginning of the game, not in the middle of the game. Presumably they were getting new emails each day. This is probably the last rendition of this particular email instance, as it were. And so I'm wondering, like, what exactly was the emotion that you wanted the player to be feeling when they got into it versus when they came out of it, versus when they came out of this instance of looking through emails. Does that make sense? Because as I'm playing this, I'm realizing that the scene is not necessarily within the emails themselves. It's not like I'm not going to be discovering an emotional turn or an entering emotion within the emails themselves. More like the email was set up, or this rendition of the email, this version of the email system, was meant to come at a time in which I am feeling a particular emotion and is meant to leave me with another. And while you answer that needlessly complex question, I will continue to peruse. Finally, the boss wants to make it clear to all members of our organization that while you may come and go from the house while transporting shipments of the product, if anyone gets the bright idea to lay a finger on one of her girls while she's gone, they will be burned alive. So there would be an excitement when they successfully hack Jensen, and then the mood would get heavier as they realize the person they're learning about is actually Rupert. Okay. I mean, that works. Excitement to disappointment, excitement to fear. Like, what's almost the gut punch of this particular, like, when you're sitting there in your office cackling about your ARG, you're like, ha ha ha. What were you like? The gut punch of this is going to be when they see. I think the gut punch is, you are not real. I mean, that's quite the gut punch. So, it's like existential horror. So like okay. So they go from right to wrong in the most wrong possible ever, right? They go from right to, that's fucking unnerving. So like, they're like, yes, I'm right. This is correct. This information is correct. I have hacked his email. And then they leave the scene going, I am not real. Yeah, I would say that that's a very successful emotional turn in a scene. acting opportunity. I'm having a hard time understanding this role. Is he a lunatic? He seems to have a rather misogynistic outlook, but it was his relationship with his father which was strained, not his mother. What is my character's motivation? I've provided you with a new script. Hopefully it answers some of your questions. The role will require some improvisation too. Can you play Manic? I want to know more about this Dr. Gordon Greer guy. He seems very antagonistic. Hospital records. It is only a matter of time until she talks. You have until Sunday to fix this. This is the woman who shows up, right? Do not come. The police are swarming all over the hospital. There's no way to slip in unnoticed. Here's a link to the town medical records. You can keep tabs on Shelley that way. Ooh. Greer's from a previous ARG set in the Australian outback. Oh, cool. Well, I think this is awesome. Is there anything else that you want me to show in particular? Because I'm going to start wrapping the stream up here in a second. But I want to make sure that I do a due diligence that you feel like I've displayed, a good amount of the correct things from the ARG. And we can do a more full stream on this as well. One of the things that's always really interesting to me about ARGs is that they're so disparate, right? Like the elements of their gameplay, the elements of the narrative are so disparate that I almost have a hard time with them. I'm glad you aren't going to show all of it because I want to play this so bad. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's a good way to, yeah. That's a fantastic excuse for me. I mean, I would highly recommend anything that Ukiyo does. I would love to actually go to Australia to do the in-person, escape room narratives. Unfortunately, I live almost literally on the other side of the earth. Here's a link. Okay, yeah, cool. You should post that again in the Discord. You should just pop that, or I can do it. You do it. It's fine. In the Discord, the self-promotion thing. I haven't gone to the Discord much this week. Sorry. I've been just... Oh, Kevin. I don't want to buy any followers, Kevin. Also, the local 58 video I sent you is 3 minutes if you want to watch that. See that craziness. How do I ban Kevin? /ban. He's probably already gone. Kevin 13. It's probably not going to work. I probably typed it wrong. The user you're trying to ban doesn't exist. How do I mod you? /mod. Do I do space username? Sasquatch. Close bracket. Invalid username. It's not. I'm looking at it. Click my name. Mod? No. Oh, what do I do? What do I do? I suck at this shit so fucking bad. And there should be a spot to mod. Permit user purge, timeout, timeout, timeout. Block, report, add friend, ban, timeout, messages, timeout, mod comments. Manage suspicious user. Click to learn more. Huh? Oh shit. Oh fuck me. Look at Discord. Okay, I will do that. So you're not supposed to put brackets in. I think you're modded. Thank you. Bye, Kevin. Kevin's been banned. Goodbye, Kevin. Trying to sell me followers. I'll have you know I get my followers for free by baking pies. So /mod space, type the beginning of the name, tab, autocomplete. Oh, okay. Thanks. I'll do that next time. Next time, I'm assuming nobody else wants to be a mod of the Twitch. If anybody wants to be a mod that's not named Kevin, sure. Anyway, I am on the on-call IT. It does make sense. So I think I'm going to save the horror video actually, because I think I do want to try and break those down. Like, I think it'd be fun to actually sit down and like really analyze those. And I don't think I'll give it enough time. Cause I do have to go pretty soon. So I think we'll save that for next week, or I want to get a poll up to see when is actually a good time to do an extra stream. Cause I do have some time. I just need to know like when there's going to be enough people to actually justify it. Cause like, I just threw it out there yesterday, like an idiot, like, hey, does anybody have like literally an hour to hang out with me in 20 minutes right now? And that was dumb. So I would like to get a little more organized with that. So I'll try and put out a poll on like what time, if you're interested, what time would you like to watch bonus streams? Because bonus streams are going to be like shorter. They're going to be, or longer, because like, you know, I've been doing a lot of longer bonus streams that were, you know, and I want to focus on other weird stuff, like, you know, like that like on analog horror shit fits perfect with what I'm talking about. Analyzing movie scenes, shit like that, right? Anyway, jam starts in 10 days. So if anybody wants to get going on that jam, you know, you can sign up. I don't know if it's on the jam calendar, but there's a link in the Discord. So I've already sent them a message on Itch. They have not responded, as is tradition with Itch, that I send them messages and then they don't respond. And it's like Thanksgiving, you know, we do it every time. We don't think about it. It's just, I ask them why my shit doesn't work and then they don't respond. But you can sign up for that. Can't mess with tradition. No, you can't. You know, Jesus was born on the 25th, maybe. And, yeah, so sign up for the jam. There's restrictions. It's going to be really fun and interesting. It's going to be hard as fuck. I am already like, shit. What am I going to do? Because I wanted to participate in this jam. I want to make like a scene, you know, a scene with an agnoresis. And I don't know how I'm going to tell that story. I'm really not sure. But right now I'm still building like the base of the game to the point where like you can literally walk around and shit. I might have to give up and go back to my roots, my adventure creator plus Unity 3D engine. I might have to do something like that, write it in Wingdings. We'll see. And yeah, so 10 days we start the jam. I'm super stoked to see what people do. Super duper excited. But yeah, until then, I hope you all have a wonderful day or night. It is almost 9 o'clock here for me. I have school in the morning. I have a test tomorrow. My German test. One of them. But then, tomorrow's my last day in German class, and I have until January 3rd. Nothing to do until January 3rd, because class ends until then. So no more 4 hours every day of school. 4 hours of hardcore fucking German learning. All right. Bye. See ya. Hardcore fucking, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That. Gute Nacht. You use the right form of the right form. Nicht guten, gute. Gute Nacht. Tschüss.